Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to look at three incredibly mind-bending missing persons cases. And honestly, these aren't your typical true crime mysteries. These are strange disappearances where human behavior, the environment, and just sheer fate collide to leave behind puzzles that challenge everything we think we know about how the world works.
We rely so heavily on forensics, right? On eyewitness testimony, on physical evidence. But what actually happens when a missing person case just totally defies all logical explanation? Like, what do you do when the physical evidence and the logical conclusions actively mislead authorities and families? Prepare yourselves, because the three cases we're breaking down today are going to make you question the very limits of deduction itself. Let's start with Chapter 1, The Returned Wife. So our first story kicks off in 1975 in the village of Qamishli, Syria, which is roughly 435 miles away from Damascus. There was a man named Abbas and his wife Zara, and they had a deeply troubled, highly abusive marriage. Well, after a particularly brutal, screaming fight one night, Zara just vanished. Right after she disappeared, Abbas started acting completely out of character for a traditional man of that era. He started doing the family shopping alone, constantly avoiding eye contact at the local market. When his neighbors finally pressed him on it, Abbas claims Zara had just abandoned him and the kids because she couldn't stand him anymore. And honestly, given the abuse she'd endured, everyone completely bought it. But then, a farmer found a headless female body in a nearby field. Abbas was arrested, charged with murder, and sentenced to life in an indescribably awful Syrian prison, where he sat for 5 long years. But then, in early 1980, the absolutely impossible happened. Zara returned to the village, alive. Now, what's truly fascinating here is the sheer certainty of the false evidence. When that headless body was originally found, numerous neighbors and relatives positively identified it as Zahra. I mean, think about it. The history of abuse, the suspicious behavior, the sudden desertion story, and then the body, it all just tied together into this perfect, logical bow. Yet, in reality, Zahra had actually been living in Damascus the entire time. She had absolutely zero idea her husband had been convicted of her murder. She was simply returning home because she missed her kids and wanted to try and fix her marriage. Well, since Zara was clearly alive, Abbas was immediately pardoned and released from prison. And here is where the story takes its darkest, most ironic turn. He marched straight home, and absolutely furious that she had left him to rot in a horrific prison, he strangled Zara right in front of their children and several eyewitnesses. So he ultimately committed the exact murder he'd been falsely imprisoned for years earlier. And as for the headless woman in the field, she was never identified. All right, that brings us to Chapter 2, The Frozen Fugitive. Let's travel to the treacherous, largely inaccessible Lady Valley in Pakistan, back in the summer of 1997. Two brothers, Nasiruddin and Khatiruddin, were on the run from a deadly family feud. Fearing they were next after the recent murder of their younger brother, they fled their ancestral home on horseback in the dead of night. Now, to understand exactly what they were riding into, you've got to understand the geography. Pakistan is home to an estimated 7,000 glaciers. 7,000. The Khoistan region is massive, unforgiving, and incredibly frigid, with annual snowfall routinely topping 10 feet. It's definitely not a place you go for a casual getaway. It is a place you go when you are desperate to disappear. So the brothers are traveling along these narrow, really dangerous paths, desperately trying to evade their pursuers. But one afternoon, near the Supat Valley Canyon, gunshots ring out. The echoing made it totally impossible to tell exactly where the attackers were, but they knew they were dangerously close. In the utter chaos of the moment, Nasiruddin either jumped off his horse to seek cover, or he slipped and fell through a patch of thin ice. Regardless of how it happened, he vanished into a deep, dark crevasse. His brother Khatiruddin scrambled frantically to find him, but found absolutely nothing. Khatiruddin miraculously managed to evade the pursuers and reached a village, but local officers flat out refused to search the deadly terrain. They knew Nasiruddin was almost certainly dead.
For decades, Nasiruddin was just a tragic memory, until August 2025, a full 28 years later. A local shepherd named Omar was tending his flock near the frozen pastures when he discovered something unthinkable. He found a fully clothed man suspended in a massive, relatively clear block of ice. And the crazy thing? The man looked like he'd only been dead for a few hours. It took authorities half a day to chisel him out. When they finally did, they pulled a national ID card from his pocket. It was Nasiruddin, looking exactly as he did the day he vanished back in 1997.
And this brilliantly illustrates the unseen forces at play in these mysteries. You might be wondering, why 2025? Why did he surface then? Well, over the past few decades, the average annual temperature in that specific region has risen by about 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1 degree Celsius. Combined with a decrease in snowfall, which usually acts as an insulator, this warming caused massive chunks of formerly stable glacial ice to just shear off. If it weren't for a warming climate, Syrian might have remained frozen in perfect preservation for millennia.
Finally, we arrive at Chapter 3, The Impossible Journey. This is perhaps the most complex psychological mystery of the three. The case centers on a newlywed couple from Boston, Jeffrey and Judy Smith. They traveled to Philadelphia in April 1997 for Jeffrey's law conference, and Judy, who absolutely loved to travel, tagged along to sightsee. Their morning on April 10th was completely mundane, just totally normal. Jeffrey woke up early, went down for breakfast, and came back up to find Judy getting ready in the shower. They joked around, they laughed, and they made a solid plan to meet back at their hotel room at 5 p.m. before hitting a cocktail hour. Jeffrey kissed her goodbye and headed out. But when he returned at 5:30 p.m., the room was totally empty. After frantically searching the hotel and calling local hospitals, Jeffrey went to the police at midnight. But he was turned away, all because of a strict 24-hour waiting policy for missing persons. Over the next few days and weeks, as the media picked up the story, the sightings of Judy that started pouring in were absolutely baffling. People saw her looking completely disoriented at Broad and Locust streets. A few days after vanishing, she allegedly checked into a Philadelphia hotel under an alias, where the staff literally dubbed her the weirdo of the week. She was heard speaking in tongues to someone she referred to as the Emperor. And, bizarrely, she was even seen masturbating in a wide-open hotel window. Later on, she was spotted shopping in a Macy's in New Jersey with her distinct red backpack, aggressively trying to convince another customer to leave with her. Her behavior was inexplicably completely erratic. For 5 exhausting months, Jeffrey and private investigators chased down all these bizarre dead ends. Then, on September 7, 1997, a father and son who were out hunting in a national forest near Asheville, North Carolina, stumbled upon a shallow grave. Animals had unfortunately scattered the remains. A medical examiner noted stab marks on the bones, as well as a severely arthritic left knee. A local doctor remembered reading about a missing woman from Philadelphia with that exact condition, and dental records soon confirmed the unthinkable. It was Judy. She'd been murdered and buried 600 miles away from where she was last seen.
So the crucial point here is the physical evidence left at the scene, because it completely upended the entire investigation. When Judy was last seen in Philly, she was wearing clothes Jeffrey immediately recognized, and she was carrying her quintessential red backpack. But the body found in Asheville, she was wearing jeans and hiking boots that Jeffrey swore he'd never seen before in his life. The red backpack was entirely missing, replaced by a black and blue vinyl backpack found nearby. Oh, and there was a pair of expensive sunglasses at the site that Jeffrey said absolutely did not belong to her. To make matters even more confounding, detectives started realizing Judy had actually been spotted around Asheville months prior, back in April. She visited the Biltmore Estate, which is a big tourist attraction down there. She casually mentioned to a clerk that her husband was an attorney at a conference in Philadelphia, so she figured she'd just check out Asheville. It gets even stranger. She bought $30 worth of sandwiches and a toy truck. Like, why a toy truck? She even tried to sleep at a local campground in a gray sedan that was packed to the brim with boxes. All of these eerie, mundane details strongly suggest she traveled those 600 miles entirely of her own free will. Now, this bizarre trail literally split the two law enforcement agencies right down the middle. North Carolina police fully cleared Jeffrey of suspicion. Not only did he have an ironclad alibi being at his conference, but he was morbidly obese. Investigators believed it was physically impossible for him to hike deep into the wilderness to bury a body. But on the flip side, Philadelphia police refused to clear him. Why? Well, he wouldn't take a polygraph test unless it was administered specifically by the FBI. And one single friend of Judy's claimed their marriage was actually quite tenuous, which completely contradicted everyone else who said they were incredibly happy. Now, we aren't taking sides here, but the stark divide in how the agencies viewed the exact same evidence is incredibly striking. Sadly, Jeffrey passed away in 2005, never knowing what actually happened to his wife.
Which brings us to our final section, lingering mysteries.
Think about it. In Syria, eyewitness certainty convicted an innocent man, only for a twisted irony to make him guilty years later. In Pakistan, a shifting climate suddenly unearthed a decades-old secret. And in America, a completely normal, happy trip turned into a tragic 600-mile anomaly.
These stories remind us that human behavior and sheer fate can and will defy all forensic logic. But the biggest blank space of all still remains with Judy. Was she suffering some kind of severe mental break? How on earth did she end up in a shallow grave 600 miles away? And what could have possibly pushed her to take that impossible journey in the first place? It's a question that challenges the very limits of what we can ever truly solve.